there was a time faith and politics just don't enter the workspace, and it wasn't as popular to talk about. But joining an organization that was very much faith-based and literally had banners throughout the organization about prayer groups, it was refreshing and also terrifying.
Welcome to Follower of One, where faith meets real work. We're a global community helping others move one notch closer to Jesus. Wherever you are, that's your mission field. You are a missionary. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Follower of One. My name is Addison Williams. I am very excited. I have a great friend here this afternoon in the podcast studio, Becky Kowall with 22 North HR. Becky, I'm excited you're here, and I'm very, very excited to talk about faith in the marketplace with you this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Addison. I'm excited as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So for context, we actually met through Faith Driven Entrepreneur. And as we all know that are in the faith and workspace, Faith Driven Entrepreneur is a way for entrepreneurs to find community. And that's really how we first got connected. And we were joking before this podcast episode, we actually talked about the Yeti mic that you're using this afternoon. So maybe we can bring some jokes into this episode today. But I would love to just cast a vision, because I talk about community every day and I help entrepreneurs get into community every day. But this podcast, this element that I'm in right now, and for those listening, I would just encourage you, wherever you are in business, whether you're a CEO or you are a janitor or you are a waiter or a waitress, you have a place in the marketplace. I like to go back to the scripture that talks about there are many parts to the body and there is one body in Christ. And so for those listening, for myself talking, for Becky on the podcast today, it's just an encouragement to know that wherever we are in our faith journey and wherever we are in our business journey, there's a place for us. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. Becky has a phenomenal journey of her faith in the marketplace, starting from a corporate career that she's going to unpack in a little bit. And then now she's running her own HR practice in the marketplace. We're going to unpack all of that. And then we're also, at the end of this episode, our third pillar of conversation today is going to be how she best fits into or really subscribes to one of the principles of Follower of One. And just to recap before we get started, we think that everybody's a missionary in the marketplace. And so the things that we ascribe to at Follower of One, number one is pray. Number two is appreciate others. Number three is know what you believe. Number four is to serve others. And number five is to speak for yourself. And so whenever we talk about marketplace mission trips, that's exactly the five pillars that we stand on. And so, Becky, let's dive in to you specifically, and then we'll bring all of that full circle to see how you're a missionary in the marketplace. So, Becky, tell the audience, how did you get to faith in the corporate world? Give us a little bit of backstory about who you are, where you're calling in from, and then we'll dive right in.
Awesome. I'm in Chicagoland right now. I've lived here my whole life in Illinois. I have been in HR for over 2 decades now, but that's not where I started. I had a lot of different jobs until I figured out where I felt like my calling was, and I fell into HR. And over the years, I've worked at different companies and different industries, probably about 10 different industries at this point, until I started being recognized as a leader in the space and started getting elevated in that way. And what I really noticed I enjoyed is when I learned that I worked for a company that was Christian based. And being in the HR space, I think we're just kind of trained at times of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in the workspace. There was a time, faith and politics just don't enter the workspace, and it wasn't as popular to talk about. But joining an organization that was very much faith-based and literally had banners throughout the organization about prayer groups, it was refreshing and also terrifying because I had people that loved that and praised it, and I had people that were complaining to me about it. And I really had a choice as a believer. How am I going to handle this conversation with grace and dignity and make sure that I don't upset leadership and that I don't upset my God, really?
Mm.
So that's when I first started experiencing what it was like to talk about faith in the workplace. And I was fortunate to work for an organization at that time in my life where um, the owners had a lot of respect. They took care of their employees, and therefore a lot of opportunity to witness in a way that didn't feel um, it was influential without feeling like it was being forced upon somebody. So that was a blessing, but still even at that, somebody had gifted me a cross, and I had it up in my office on top of my desk, above the bookshelves, and somebody had made a comment that made me feel unapproachable because they weren't a Christian. And so that was an interesting situation to be in, and I had to navigate that with respect, understanding that maybe that person's not a believer right now or doesn't feel like I'm going to respect them. But Addison, for me, like those are the opportunities where I can show what Christianity is. I can treat them just like I would anybody else and show them what's different about how we approach people in faith. So
Yeah,
that's when it first started entering into my career space, and I felt like there was an intersect between my beliefs and what I was doing in a job.
absolutely. You've said so many good things already. With the companies prior, they weren't Christian, yet you were still bringing your faith into the marketplace. So you mentioned the organization that you worked for was Christian. So when you were looking for a new organization to work for, was that a pillar that you were looking for as an organization?
Desperately.
So you wanted the faith-based organization.
I really did, and I was really nervous at the time. The company I was referencing earlier, it was an amazing company, and they really did. I had three promotions there. I had experienced so many growth opportunities there, but I had really hit a plateau, which is a recurring theme in my life is when I hit a plateau. I like to create, build, optimize, and move. And it was a really hard decision to make, but it was the right one to make. I felt like I was, ready to take on the next challenge and ready to grow even more. But I was really scared. Am I going to be able to find another company that allows faith into the workplace where I can wear my cross necklace without being told I need to tuck it into my shirt? And can I
Mm,
take Good Friday off? And I want a longer Easter weekend, like these types of conversations that are important to me.
yeah,
I didn't quite know how to interview for that yet. I did not know how to interview for that. I didn't feel comfortable asking those questions because I hadn't experienced the spiritual growth that I have today. So I wasn't prepared for those conversations. And through the hand of God, I ended up at an organization. The CEO was very much a believer, led with so much integrity, and he demanded that from his leadership team as well. But it never came up in the interview process. It's one of those things, if you know, you know, like you could
yeah,
just see it in the person. And I remember the very first interview, meeting him in person. I was like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this job. I have to be here. This is going to be amazing. And it was. It was
yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I can certainly highlight a lot of things, but whenever you said create, build, optimize, and move, those are like four pillars. I think that we could spend an hour talking about those four pillars and interact with that. So let's set the stage. You're at a Christian company, you're a Christian HR executive, and you already said if you know, and so I would love to cast a vision, cast a story about how you interacted with those employees that might not have the same faith or the same beliefs as you, but you still, as you said, grace and dignity and respect. You still had those three things, potentially more things, but those are the ones that just stick out to me right now. So I would love, from a practical standpoint, how did you do those three things to show that you loved on people in your position, yet not throwing the Bible at them to say this is the only way to live your life?
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack there. I'm going to try to be as concise when I say this because I was blessed to walk into an environment where they literally had a Bible study happening and they were trying to keep it, I think, quiet for me because they didn't know who I was yet. They didn't know that I was also a believer. And depending on what type of leader you are and what your beliefs are, somebody might say, as an HR person, well, you can't hold groups like that, and you definitely can't have a leadership member part of them. It's just one of those funny things. I walked into um, a bathroom and I heard them talking about the prayer group that night. And so I asked if, I asked questions like, I'd love to be part of that. And everybody was like really scared about it at first. And I ended up having a conversation with the CEO, and he's like, do you think this is a problem? And I said, absolutely not. You're not demanding that this is part of the work environment. It's not being facilitated by you. It's something that is happening on lunch break, and you're supporting it. And I think that's amazing. So that was the first conversation about faith. I was lucky to have a CEO and other members of leadership, but because we were somewhat of a smaller organization, let's just say about 150, it felt like everybody kind of knew everybody and who we were. It wasn't until we really started to scale that we started, bringing in people that maybe came from different backgrounds. Because when you're smaller, so I have to digress for a second here, Addison, because my specialty is working with CEOs and founders of small organizations, and then I help them scale their business, their people operations. I work in tandem with the CFO on the finance side and scale people operations. So when we're scaling and we're talking about human capital, we're talking about the interview process and how we protect the talent that's coming in, which feeds into the culture. And that's really when they figured out who I am, is when I started talking about our interview process needs to mirror our pillars, our values. What do we want our employees to reflect when they work here? And we did that in a way that didn't feel intrusive. And maybe at a few times there was people that might have said or asked a question in the interview process, is this a Christian-based company? I said, I do know that we have many believers in the organization. It's certainly not a requirement. I view that as a perk, if you will. And it was never a controversial conversation at this organization. At other organizations that came after this one, it very much was. And those conversations did get a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to unpack all the difficult conversations, but from a HR perspective, I would love for you to give your perspective on how you can navigate those waters within an environment that might not be as welcoming as the organization that you were able to be a part of. So, would you be able to provide some recommendations of those people that might be in a more difficult environment, how they can find an opportunity to discover ways to interact in a healthy way, or to find out if there are some other believers in the room? And even for those that aren't believers, what would you say to that?
I guess the first thing I would say is during the interview process, when we're bringing people in, that's where I would encourage listeners, if that is something that's important to you at your place of business, ask the leading questions that will help you understand the culture you're walking into. What kind of groups exist here? What is the culture like? What do people believe here? Well, and whoever's interviewing you may say, well, what do you mean? What do we believe? But a Christian person that's getting asked that will be happy to tell you what we believe in if it's, a Christian-based organization. And I have learned there's two different things. There's a Christian organization that is quietly Christian. They don't talk about it because they're scared to talk about it. Not necessarily they're ashamed of their faith, but they don't understand how to navigate those conversations in the business space. I can help with that. Like I'm an executive leader that can help with those type of conversations. Then there's the other type of leader that you can go on their website and you can see their faith anywhere you click. I've only worked for one organization like that, and I will tell you, you should be unapologetic and bold, and I think it's great, but also be prepared to be able to navigate the non-believer questions. The person that wants the job that says, but how do I fit in here? You fit in here because we're followers of Jesus and we love everybody. We respect everybody. And there's always going to be a place for you here. You may not believe the same things we do, but you will always feel welcome and you will always feel inclusive of what's going on here. Like that would be my message.
That's a great message. And it goes back to the descriptive words that you said earlier, which were have grace and dignity. And I think that that aligns so much with the foundation of our faith, right? Love other people, and that love can be inserted in us in so many different ways to engage with that. And so that's fantastic, Becky. So shifting gears just a little bit, not too far away, talk a little bit about that transition from your corporate career that we were just talking about to now 22 North HR. First of all, I would love to unpack 22 North and find out from you what made you think of that name specifically.
All right. You want me to start with the name of 22 North?
I would love for you to start with the name. We'll start there and then we'll break it down.
I wanted to have a name that resembled um, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And we can talk about that in a minute, but staying on point with 22 North. 22 is the day my son was born. North is where my husband is. That's where his heart is. He was raised very much in part of Wisconsin. And then HR is me. So I wanted to find a way to blend the three of us because God being my first priority, my family is second. And having my family woven into the name is a constant reminder of why I do the grind I do and why I work as hard as I do for God and for my family.
That's such a great model. I, over this past week, I have had a lot of conversations and directives of the Trinity, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so for you to come here and unpack the meaning behind the name of your organization, for it to resemble the Trinity in a sense, right? The power of three. Three strands are not easily broken. And so as a reminder of the power, not only of you as an owner, but bringing that power into the name and the meaning behind that, that is just awesome. I love that. So you mentioned that there might be some more to unpack there in terms of your business. So I would love to, if you would like to just cast vision into mission and values, how you go about your business, would love for you to share with the audience.
Yeah, and hopefully I answer your question and don't go off on a tangent here, but I think the important part with 22 North is like at the time I launched 22 North, what I thought I was going to be doing is not what I'm actually doing today. So I had stepped away from corporate America because I was called to do that. There was nothing wrong. It was a calling that I experienced in December of 2023. And it was a recurring theme. And I was feeling I had hit every career milestone I had for myself. but yet I was like so restless. I still was feeling so unfulfilled. God blessed me with a, a very good income, great insurance. Um, I was thriving on the leadership team that I was at. I had great board exposure. And all that aside, I still was feeling like, is this my purpose? What else is there? Like, why do I feel so unfulfilled? And I started praying about it, and I ended up resigning in January of 2024. And then I was enticed to come back and stay, and that was not obedient. And God closed that door a little bit more firmly that time in June.
Mm.
And fast forward, I spent the next couple months listening, praying. 22 North launched it. At the time I did that, Addison, it was it was really just weeks after that. I had experienced so much loss personally in my family, and was then, medical diagnosis and just like spiritual warfare would just kept hitting me. And of course it was, right? Because we know that's where the devil's at work is when you're pursuing God. And that's what happened. So I was thinking, well, if I did fractional HR, I would be able to tend to all these things, like all these things that are happening in my personal life, including a major surgery I had to have. I can do this and still maintain what I'm good at doing, what I enjoy doing, and I can take care of all this stuff too. Fast forward, when all this happened in Q4 of last year, it took me down, like it crushed my heart. I felt like I was crushed in spirit. And I took a step back saying, God, did I hear you right? Did I really hear you right? Was I supposed to start 22 North, or did I just want to? In February, I remember it vividly. It was like 4:20 a.m. in the morning. I was up, like God had me up, and He had put these thoughts in my mind so vividly that I was able to come downstairs at 4:20 in the morning and write a brand new business plan, brand new strategy, all new service offerings. And I believe that I heard God tell me, you are going to pursue your purpose through the spiritual gifts you have, but it will be for purpose-driven organizations. It will be for private equity firms that believe in the same core values that you do. And you will help leaders lead with more integrity. That is the rebirth of 22 North. And I went through a rebrand from February till July, August time. So rebranded the service offerings, and while it doesn't scream faith on the website, again, if you know, you know, the way that
Right.
my core values are written, the way my story's written, um, there's very intentional pictures used on my website to show the fracture and to show the shattering of my life, and then how it melted away. And here I am. This is me trying to pursue my purpose for God.
That's amazing. That's such a great story and impactful. It goes back to being disciplined. It goes back to thinking about ways that we can really be in tune with the Spirit. And that shows that. I was recently talking to a friend that said he told God, God, if you really want me to do this, you need to wake me up between this time and this time, because any normal person wouldn't be up between this time and this time. And God woke him up at 4:20 one morning and told him exactly what he needed to do, right? It's the confirmation is what we're talking about. God didn't audibly talk to him, and I can sense that God didn't audibly talk to you either, but just the discipline of us being intentional about our faith. That's what we're talking about here. It's this idea of how do we get in tune with the Spirit, and then how do we allow the Spirit to guide us and shape us into our next chapter, whatever that chapter is. But in order to go to the next chapter, you and I both know like reading the employee handbook, which let's be honest, nobody ever really reads the employee handbook.
True.
Sorry to break it to you, Becky, but that doesn't happen. We just want to flip to the PTO pages. We want to figure out how much money we're going to make and what bonuses we're going to make. Oh, and by the way, what's the best Christmas gift that we can get working for this
That's
company?
right.
That is so true. I get it. I've played that game. I'm not in HR, but I know what I look for. Totally kidding. For those that are listening to this podcast, I do have a little bit more of a conscience effort into the organizations that I work for. But we all know that we appreciate PTO. We appreciate the Christmas gift. So if an employer is listening to this podcast, just remember that Christmas is right around the corner. So make sure that you keep that on the calendar. So, Becky, back to it. I would love to pivot our time and talk about the third pillar of this podcast, which is how do you see yourself as a missionary in the marketplace? And let me unpack it because whenever we think the term missionary, oftentimes we think that we have to go to another country to be on mission for God. And Mike, the leadership team, a follower of one, we are very clear, and that is a great motive to have to go overseas and go on a mission trip by all means. I personally spent 3.5 weeks in the Dominican Republic with Athletes in Action. I know what a mission trip feels like. I know that tangibly you can't express the feelings that you get whenever you go and serve people. But as we bring it back to the third pillar on this podcast, I would also just remind us all that we're missionaries every day in the marketplace because we believe in Jesus. We believe that Jesus is who he said he was and still is today. We talked about the Trinity. 22 North HR is such a powerful example of how employers can infuse their values and their deepest held beliefs as an individual into their company without screaming. And I'm raising my hand for those that are just listening. I am a follower of Jesus. And so we can do that. So, Becky, I would love to, once again, when we think about prayer, appreciating others, knowing what we believe, serving others, speaking for yourself, as somebody of your stature, as you think and come through and work with companies, I would love to ask you the question, Becky, how are you a marketplace missionary for Jesus within your company?
Serving others is the one that stands out to me the most, Addison. It's embedded into my DNA. I truly believe that. Like I just want to help. And it doesn't even matter in what way that looks like. There's so many things. There's administrative, operational, and strategic HR. There's a lot of different um, tasks in a day or things that people need. And I've always tried to remind myself and pride myself on not forgetting how I started. And how I
Mm,
started was I was raised in a blue collar family. One parent worked, one didn't. Didn't have the money to go to college when all my friends did. I started working at 15 years old and I haven't stopped since. And I wouldn't change a thing. All of those experiences have shaped me into who I am today and how I
yeah,
serve. And
yeah.
I remember, my dad has taught me so many amazing things. And one of the things my dad said is never treat somebody different based on their title, ever.
Mm,
A janitor is the same as an executive. And it is true for people that are listening. It is so true. It talks about your character and your credibility and who you are as a human being and how you treat people and how you treat animals. I'm just going to add that in there. It tells me everything I need to know about somebody. And the second thing my dad taught me is to never turn down an opportunity to learn. And
mm,
sometimes learning is by serving others, asking
yeah,
for job enlargement, asking for extra things to do that are outside of the scope of your job, and all in the spirit of, am I showing up as my best? Am I showing up different? in a way that I can be reliable, in a way that I can be helpful, in a way that feels like I'm serving. And I'm not great about reciting this, but there's a scripture that talks about serving people as if you're serving the Lord. And I remember the first time I read that, I reminded myself to stop grumbling about work, about some of those tasks that you don't enjoy doing. It's like you kind of put it off, and but if it's helping somebody else, do it for the glory of God. Do it because you're serving. So hopefully I answered your question, but that's for me, it's and it brings me joy to serve and help other people. Like I get asked a lot, how do you know you had a good day? Well, when I can help someone else solve a problem or figure out a path forward, like to me, that's so fulfilling.
That's great. I would echo that 100%. And I would also double down on one thing that you did say, which resonates with me a lot, is not forgetting how and where you started. And I think that that also goes back to our faith, is it not? The day that we said Jesus is who Jesus said he was, the day that we say and surrender, God, you are Lord in our lives, and let me now be your servant. Let me know who you are. And I think that actually, I know that if we keep our mentality of our faith at the forefront of everything that we do, it trickles down into everything. It trickles down into the work that we do. It trickles down into how we treat other people, as in relationships. And so echoing your point of not forgetting where you started, I think that's so true because whenever you consider the marketplace, there are a lot of people that start as the sales guy and then they continue to hit those promotions, much like you did whenever you were talking about your previous career or organizational spot. Whenever you hit promotions, you then become the VP of sales or you become the VP of HR, and then somebody new comes into that sales role. And so I think that that just doubled down on the element of remember that you were that new person at one time. And that so beyond just resembles what you're talking about, serving others. So I greatly appreciate that. That's a fantastic word. I think back to my days whenever I played baseball, and I laugh because you get senioritis, right? There's a thing about senioritis. It's like, I'm a senior now. I don't have to do anything. Uh, but as a freshman, knowing what senioritis was and how that dynamic impacted not only me, but people around me during sports, I made a pact that I wasn't going to be the senior that made the freshman do everything. And I think that does change the dynamic whenever you go through the ranks of leadership as an employee to an executive, whenever you keep that at the forefront of reminding yourself to serve others, that's what we want. So I love that. Becky, if you could leave our audience with one thing, or maybe a couple of things, if you can't think of just one, what would you say as we sign off on today's message?
Um, One of the things I feel very strongly about to share with listeners is pursuing your purpose and pursuing it relentlessly. Discover what you were made for. Take a spiritual gifts assessment. Ask other people what they see your strengths are. But when you reflect on what you're doing in your job, know why you're doing it. Is it changing who you are, or is it feeding into the body of Christ because of who you are? So, um, pursuing it relentlessly, like that's what comes to mind. And then um, for any leaders that might be listening, I would also say, humble yourself that we don't know everything. So I think it was John Maxwell who said when a leader grows, everyone wins. But sometimes when, Addison, to your point, you said senioritis. Well, sometimes when you hit that VP role or your EVP role or C-suite, whatever it is, sometimes you're too afraid to ask for help. You're too embarrassed to admit what you don't know. Don't do that.
Mm.
It's better to be humble and continue to learn every single day. Don't be afraid to learn new things and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Becky, that is a great word. You have given us so many words of wisdom today. For all of our listeners that are listening to today's podcast with Becky, I hope that you were encouraged. I hope that you were enlightened. I hope that you took Becky's wisdom of how to serve others, how to lead with grace and dignity, and then lastly, don't have senioritis. Make sure that you continue to stay intentional day in and day out and press into your faith. So, Becky, thank you once again for being a guest on today's podcast. We will have show notes below. And then also, we will have a direct way, the best way to get in touch with Becky down below as well in the show notes. For now, once again, Becky, thank you for joining us on today's podcast. My name is Addison Williams, host of the Follower of One podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Addison.
Thanks, Becky. As you go, live your faith with intention. Pray, appreciate others, know what you believe, serve others, speak for yourself. These small steps shape a faithful life. Wherever God has placed you, walk it out with courage. You are a missionary.